No, no. Okay, I wanted to talk about Numa Pompilia. And my argument is that it is men like Numa that make tribes great, right? And so we would have to think about Confucius in China, right? I heard about this one of the early followers of Confucius. I think they said he was, but it turned out he was a lord, and the Chinese were warring with each other, and his lord was one of the kings, one of the many claimants of centralized power. And but I think this nephew of his was maybe young or something or weak, I don't know. And this lord could have taken power, but he didn't, right? He had the thoughts of the Chinese people in mind rather than his own power. He had to, what is right to do. Um, because I mean, a lot of times we talk about history and we talk about the exploits of the leaders, but we don't talk about those followers, right? If the followers are immoral, then the leaders are going to be either weak or nasty. Um, Actually, just weak. But I mean, and not just Confucius, but also men like Lao Tzu, right? It is these men which drive the true members of prosperity who don't always have an eye placed upon them. Um, it was the decisions of this follower of Confucius uh, which led to more stability in his own region. When other actions would have destabilized. But so Numa, let's get to Numa. Numa, I mean, we have to like Numa was Etruscan, and but the Romans wanted him because he was a moral man, right? I think he was like an Etruscan monk type, and they dragged him over there. So we have to assume that these Romans had this moral attitude, and it is mythologized that they're the descendants of the survivors of Troy. Now, this would make sense because the survivors of Troy would have seen that immorality destroys tribes. So uh, these men and women who fled uh, who fled this destruction would have nurtured in their children collectively as a tribe. They would have nurtured in them this idea that morality brings strength. And so we would have to like look at their choosing a foreigner, right? This Etruscan to rule over them. Um, Now I don't know when the gods of the borders came into the Roman pantheon. I mean, we could assume that they came in before Numa came in. But Numa would have strengthened and promoted these gods of borders. Uh, and despite modern propaganda, uh, it was actually the strength of the Romans that they worshipped these gods of borders because they had two gods of borders apparently, and yet these two gods were the most powerful gods in their pantheon. Right, and what does the god of border represent? I mean, the god of border represents respect, right? Does it not? And so the Romans, like if you look at, like think about life in Italy before the Roman Republic, right? You have tribes fighting with each other. You have intertribal fights between two different, or three or four different bigwigs, I'm in charge. And so life before the Roman Republic is going to be a very small world. But after the Roman Republic, you could travel around, right? And the Romans respected languages and borders in the early days. This is the early republic before they were corrupted by the Greeks. But in the early days, they did respect borders, and so these were true allies of the Romans. Anytime the Romans got into a war, you would have a foreign-speaking Italian man who was fighting on the Roman side, because this was just simply a much better, trade would have increased, and so everyone's quality of life would have gone up. Now, of course, I'm not arguing for utopia, because the quality of life of the rich could have gone up more. But I would assume that even the quality of the life of the poor went up to some degree. Um, yeah, and I'm definitely not arguing that this early Roman Republic was a utopia of virtue. Um, I mean, you could look at the fight between the plebeians and the patricians. I mean, the plebeians don't do that anywhere in the world throughout history, including up into our own day. All of the plebeian fights that happen in our day are controlled. They're not true plebeian fights. If they were true plebeian fights, then the powers that be would be afraid. But all of the plebeian, you know, complaints are just jokes. Um, but this ability for the plebeians to take such a strong stance against their leaders is unseen and unheard of. And so this can only take place if these plebeians have this sense of morality. It's like, hey, we could be moral too, right? Because a lot of the times the difference or the or origination of leadership comes from the man in the tribe who just gets things done. I mean, it's whether leadership's the same. This is a sociological thing. But then he puts his children in control who aren't as talented as he, and then trouble starts, right? um, so I mean, you have this divide, but these plebeians can only, I mean, can only can only fight back and have checks and balances, with with this moral attitude and this moral sense. And this moral sense would have been, greatly increased by men like Numa, right? Um, in the Roman Republic, there was the practice of doing lots, right? And they were doing lots to, let the gods decide which consul goes where. A practice like this would have had its origins from men like Numa, right? Because I mean, you could call this superstitious, but at the same time, even from an atheistic perspective, you could say that this is a better way to choose leaders, because you're choosing leaders uh, because the leader has to have ability to face whatever challenge is forced upon him. Like if you choose Gary just because Gary speaks Etruscan, Gary could be an idiot. He could have corrupt connections in Etruria. So to choose a leader based upon superficial, uh, and so by doing it by lots, it's the man has to have ability no matter what challenge he faces. And so this was an act of impiety when the Romans did this, and it showed a moral decline, right? Because again, we're moving away from ability here and moving over more to a Greek style celebration of immorality, right? Um, So yeah, Numa. Like if you're conquered in Italy, then Rome's gonna, you're gonna keep your language and your laws, right? Now Romans would take the lands of treaty breakers, right? Because treaty breakers are disgusting, right? Because again, this is about morality. It's about human behavior. And so when the Romans talked about the laws of the gods, they weren't being vague or, you know, or theological. They're talking about law, right? Specific laws, like you can't break treaties. That's vile. I mean, we all know about the American government breaking the treaties with the Native Americans. I mean, that's disgusting and vile. Um, and a lot of times, like we're only learning about this now, but our ancestors didn't know about this, right? They were kept in ignorance by their leaders. Uh, so that has to be considered. But these are vile things that are being done by the leaders, right? Da-dum, da-dum. So, yeah, no, I would, because everybody has a tribe, or everybody has a man in the tribe like Romulus, but they don't uh, rise. They don't like these were true allies of Rome. Like if Rome got into a fight, these men would, be like, "Hey, friend, we like you, Romans." Uh, because it turns out that morality does lead to prosperity. Now, of course, I'm not arguing that this early Roman Republic was a utopia, because we do see these fights between the plebs and the patricians, and the patricians could be vile at times. Um, but the plebs would fight for themselves. Do do do. Let's see here. Numa, Numa, Numa. Um, I mean, yeah, it's really this a false historical attitude. Uh, because I mean, the true historical attitude is the prosperity of a tribe comes from that brave or benevolent or loving or man who no one ever talks about. Um, I mean, we only talk about that follower of Confucius because the writer who was pointing it out was probably a follower of Confucius himself or a religious man uh, who was trying to make a point. Otherwise, most of these people don't never get talked about. And it's not the exploits of the leaders that where true prosperity comes from, right? I mean, we're told in our own day that power and amazingness comes from immorality, but that we can see with our own eyes that that's blatantly false. This attitude, which is a Mosaic attitude. It's Moses was all about the law, right? It's all about uh, simple behavior towards one another. It's about respect. Much of the Latinization of Italy, you know, came from non Latins becoming Latins because they wanted to. And we hear about all these actions that Romans do to some, but at the same time, everyone has to admit that treaty breaking is vile, is it not? So maybe some of these are false compassion that's happening, right? Because should you have compassion for malicious treaty breakers? No. If they repent and change their ways, then yes, because it's all about change in behavior. If the behavior changes, then yes, but that's a different. For them, it would be, and again, it's about the God of Borders, so it's about respect. I don't know where rehabilitation or redemption would fit into the Roman society. But I mean, the early republic, again. Okay, here we go. Uh, Cicero was an immoral man, right? He was an immoral man, as well as all of these so-called believers in the Old Republic, right? These were the corrupt men of Rome. And these corrupt men of Rome were putting on a false moral face, right? Cicero is a man who will talk pretty to you, but he will literally stab you in the back or pay someone to do it. Right? He will talk pretty to your face, but then he will pay someone to stab you in the back. I mean, this is not a moral man. These so-called defenders of the Old Republic were tyrants who blasphemed freedom with their mouth, and the people knew it. Like, if there was a true democracy, then none of these people would be in power. So we see that tyranny and evil can be masked by morality, and so we would have to go to we can't simplify this early Roman Republic, because what I'm arguing is that in many ways they did have some very moral behavior, but at the same time there's other behavior which would not be moral, or which would not be moral. And you would have to look at the specific behavior. And so, looking specifically at these gods of borders, you would see that respect. But then you could interject and say, but they had a usury, and all these plebs were were suffering under all of these mischievous laws to keep them down, right? And so there was, I mean, this was definitely not a moral, a utopian moral society by any means. I mean, if you look at the rise of the Protestant work ethic, you could say that it led to a short-term power for the Protestant nations, right? Because it led to a shit ton of production. But now their families and their societies have been destroyed because it's all work and no love. I mean, the Egyptian society that the Jews were living in was a Protestant work ethic society, and Moses was righteous for rest and for time with each other and stuff. A more balanced society, and so you could say that there was a morality, with all this work, but it was too much. It was overboard. And it was this too much work which ended up destroying their families and their societies. But this would be a false morality. So we could even say that false morality can drive momentary tribal success. But at the same time, we look at immoral tribes, and they fall fast and hard. And That is just. I mean, a lot of the times they can surround themselves with all these clever little defenses, but once those defenses fall, it's like, who's going to defend you? You know, is it going to be effeminated, submissive men uh, that you've created? Do 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 do. So yeah, no, a moral society does rise. Even a false moral society can rise for a bit. So you know, you would have to have a deeper discussion about the early Roman Republic. Um, I am by no means uh, giving a comprehensive argument, right? Because there's a lot I don't know about the early Roman Republic. Um, but I would argue, though, that the power of Rome came from these moral attitudes. Um, whether they be false moral attitudes or true, right? The truer moral attitudes will last longer, but all things become corrupted.